The air in Marcus's house always felt thick, like it was holding him down. At 16, he'd grown used to the way the walls seemed to lean in, whispering rules he didn't make and didn't want. No music louder than a hymn, no friends unless they sat in the front pew on Sundays, and a curfew, 8 p.m. sharp, that chained him to this beige prison while the rest of the world spun on without him. His parents called it love. Marcus called it a cage. Tonight, though, the cage rattled. Dinner had been a battlefield. His father, a wiry man with a voice like gravel, sat at the head of the table, fork poised over his mashed potatoes like a scepter. "College or the hardware store, Marcus," he'd said, his grey eyes boring into him. "Those are your choices. God didn't give you a brain to waste it." Marcus had stared at his plate, the peas blurring into green smudges. His mother, all pinched lips and folded hands, chimed in about responsibility, about how she'd prayed for him to find his path. He'd wanted to scream that his path wasn't theirs to pave. Instead, he'd shoved his chair back, the screech of wood on linoleum slicing through their sermon. "I'm not you," he'd spat, voice trembling. His father's face darkened, a storm brewing. "You'll be what we raised you to be," he barked. "Sit down." But Marcus didn't. He bolted upstairs, slamming his bedroom door so hard the frame shook. His sister, Ellie, 12, and all wide eyes, peeked out from her room across the hall, but he waved her off. He didn't need her pity. Now, sprawled on his bed, Marcus stared at the ceiling. The clock ticked past 9 p.m., each second a dare. Outside, the small town of Haven hummed faintly. Crickets, a distant car, the life he wasn't allowed to touch. He rolled onto his side, catching his reflection in the cracked mirror propped on his dresser. Dark hair flopped over hazel eyes that looked too tired for 16. A bruise from last week's discipline, a belt across his back, still ached under his shirt. He wasn't a kid anymore, but they wouldn't let him be anything else. Then he heard it. A faint clatter, like metal on concrete, drifting through his open window. Curiosity tugged at him. He slid off the bed, heart thudding, and pressed his face to the glass. Down the street, past the neat lawns and picket fences, shadows moved. 3 figures, hunched and quick, darted along the side of the old gas station. One held something, can, and a sharp hiss cut the night. Marcus squinted. Spray paint. Red streaks bloomed across the cinder-block wall, jagged and alive. The Ravens. He'd heard the whispers at school, kids swapping stories in the lunchroom about the gang that roamed Haven's edges. Petty thieves, troublemakers, a pack of misfits who answered to no one. To Marcus, they sounded like freedom. His breath fogged the glass as he watched, mesmerized. The tallest figure turned, hood up, and for a split second, Marcus swore their eyes met. His pulse spiked. He ducked back, chest tight. They couldn't have seen him, could they? The house was silent now. His parents' voices faded to murmurs downstairs. He glanced at the window again. The shadows were still there, laughing low, their outlines sharp against the streetlight's glow. Something snapped inside him, a frayed thread of restraint. He grabbed his hoodie from the floor, black and worn, and yanked it on. His sneakers were by the door, but he didn't dare go downstairs. The window would have to do. The rules, the walls, they were suffocating me. That night, I didn't care about the drop. I just needed out. He'd climbed out once before, just to sit on the roof and breathe. This was different. The drop to the grass below looked farther in the dark, but he swung his legs over anyway, palms slick with sweat. The shingles scraped his knees as he slid down, and then he was falling, landing hard, the jolt rattling his teeth. He froze, waiting for a light to flick on, a shout to yank him back. Nothing. Just the crickets and his own ragged breathing. He was out. The street stretched ahead, quiet except for the faint hiss still echoing from the gas station. Marcus moved toward it, sneakers silent on the pavement. The closer he got, the louder His heartbeat roared in his ears. He rounded the corner and stopped. There they were, 3 ravens, hoods up, spray cans glinting in their hands. The wall was a mess of red and black now, jagged letters spelling something he couldn't read. The tallest one turned, and Marcus saw a flash of a grin under the hood. "You lost, kid?" the voice called, rough but teasing. Marcus's mouth went dry. He should have run, should have gone back to his cage, but his feet wouldn't move. One of the others, a girl with a streak of blue in her hair, tossed a can in the air and caught it, smirking. "He's just watching," she said. "Give him something to do." The tall one stepped closer, holding out a can of red paint. Up close, Marcus saw scars on his knuckles, a piercing glinting in his ear. "You in or out?" he asked. Marcus's hand trembled as he took the can. It was cold, heavier than he'd expected. The ravens watched him, eyes gleaming with something between challenge and amusement. He didn't know what he was doing, didn't know why he wasn't running, but the weight of his parents' rules, their voices, their cage, it all pressed down until he couldn't breathe. He shook the can, the rattle loud in the stillness, and aimed it at the wall. The first spray hit like a gunshot, red slashing across the grey. His chest loosened, a wild laugh bubbling up. The tall one clapped him on the shoulder. "Not bad, newbie," he said. The girl nodded, impressed. Marcus stared at the mark he'd made, his mark, and felt alive for the first time in years. Then headlights flared at the end of the street. The ravens tensed. "Time to bounce," the tall one barked, and they scattered like smoke. Marcus stood there, can still in hand, heart hammering. The lights crept closer. He had seconds to decide, run home or follow them. "I should have turned back, but their laughter pulled me in, like a promise I didn't know I needed." He ran after the shadows. The night air tasted sharper now, like it carried a secret Marcus was finally in on. He crouched behind a rusted dumpster, chest heaving from the sprint, the spray can still clutched in his hand. The headlights from the street had swept past, missing him by inches, and the ravens were gone, melted into the shadows like they'd never been there. But their laughter lingered in his ears, a siren call he couldn't shake. He should have gone home. Instead, he waited. A low whistle cut through the dark, sharp and deliberate. Marcus peeked out. The tall one from before stood at the edge of an abandoned lot, hood shoved back now, revealing a mess of dark curls and a jawline that looked like it could cut glass. "You're still here?" he said, voice carrying a mix of surprise and approval. He sauntered over, boots crunching on gravel, and stuck out a hand. "Name's Jace. Welcome to the mess." Jace owned the night. I could see it in his grin, his scars. He was everything I wasn't, and I wanted that. Marcus hesitated, then shook it, his own hand clammy against Jace's calloused grip. "Marcus," he muttered, feeling small under the older boy's gaze. Jace couldn't be more than 19, but he carried himself like he owned the night. 2 others emerged behind him, the girl with the blue streak flicking a lighter on and off, and a wiry kid with a shaved head twirling a pocket knife. "That's Lila," Jace said, nodding at the girl, "and that's Tuck. You met us at a good time, Marcus. We're short a pair of hands." "For what?" Marcus asked, voice cracking slightly. He hated how young he sounded. Jace grinned, all teeth and trouble. "For whatever we want. You're not one of those church kids who's gonna bolt at the first dirty word, are you?" Marcus bristled, thinking of his father's sermons, his mother's prayers. "No," he said, sharper than he meant. "Good," Jace replied, tossing him a black bandana from his pocket. "Tie that on. Makes you one of us. Least till you prove it." Marcus fumbled with the fabric, knotting it around his wrist. It smelled faintly of smoke and gasoline, and something about it felt heavier than it should have. Lila smirked, her lighter casting flickers across her face. "He's green, Jace. You sure?" Jace waved her off. "Green's fine. We all started somewhere. Right, Tuck?" The wiry kid just grunted, flipping his knife shut.
They led him across the lot, a sprawl of cracked concrete and weeds, choked with trash. A busted couch sagged in the middle, flanked by crates and a flickering lantern. The Raven's hideout. Jace flopped onto the couch, kicking his legs up. "First rule," he said, "is you don't ask permission. You take what's yours. Parents, cops, teachers, they don't get it. We do." His eyes locked on Marcus, bright and unyielding. "You ever feel like that?" Marcus nodded, before he could stop himself. "All the time." Jace's grin widened. "Then you're home, kid. But home's gotta test you." He pulled a crumpled flyer from his jacket, a corner store ad, the kind plastered on telephone poles. "Step 1. Grab us a bottle from Old Man Carter's place. Liquor, not beer. Something strong. You in?"
Marcus's stomach twisted. Stealing paint was one thing. Breaking into a store was another. But Jace's stare pinned him, and Lila's lighter clicked like a countdown. He thought of his father's belt, his mother's disappointed sighs. "Yeah," he said, voice steadier now. "I'm in." The store was a 5-minute walk, a squat brick building with a flickering neon sign, Carter's Goods. Tuck picked the lock on the back door, a skill Marcus filed away with a mix of awe and unease, while Lila kept watch. Jace shoved Marcus forward. "Quick and quiet. Don't think, just move." The door creaked open, and Marcus slipped inside, heart slamming against his ribs. You can see how that. The air smelled of dust and stale coffee. Shelves loomed in the dark, stocked with cans and bottles that glinted faintly. He crept toward the back, where the liquor sat behind a counter. His sneakers squeaked on the tile, and he froze, breath held. Nothing, just the hum of a fridge. He vaulted the counter, hands shaking as he scanned the labels. Whiskey, vodka, rum. He grabbed a bottle of Jack Daniels, the glass cold and slick, and stuffed it under his hoodie. Every step back to the door felt like a mile, the weight of the bottle pressing against his chest. My hands shook, but I didn't stop. It wasn't just a bottle. It was a key to something bigger. Outside, Jace clapped him on the back, laughing. "Look at that! Kid's got guts." Lila took the bottle, cracking it open with a grin. "Not bad, newbie." Tuck just nodded, a rare flicker of respect in his eyes. They passed the whiskey around, the burn of it hitting Marcus's throat like fire. He coughed, and they laughed, but it wasn't cruel. It was warm, like he belonged. The high lasted until dawn crept over the horizon. Marcus stumbled home, the bandana still tied to his wrist, the taste of whiskey on his tongue. He climbed back through his window, quieter this time, and collapsed onto his bed. But the door creaked open minutes later. His father loomed in the frame, face a mask of fury. "Where were you?" he demanded. Marcus sat up, head spinning. "Nowhere," he lied, voice thick. "You're grounded," his father snapped. "No leaving this house till I say." He slammed the door, leaving Marcus in the dark. Grounded. Like that stop him now. He waited until the house settled, then slipped out again, the bandana a shadow against his skin. The Ravens were waiting. Jace met him at the lot, eyes glinting under the lantern's glow. "You're tougher than you look," he said, tossing Marcus a fresh can of spray paint. "Stick with us, and you'll see what's coming. Big job. Real family stuff." Marcus gripped the can, the promise sinking into him like ink. Whatever it was, he wanted it. Marcus barely recognized himself anymore. 3 weeks with the Ravens had sanded down the edges. 3 weeks with the Ravens had sanded down the edges of the kid who flinched at his father's voice. School was a blur now, just a place to nap through algebra before slipping out the back door to meet Jace and the crew. The black bandana stayed knotted around his wrist, a badge he wore, even when he didn't mean to. It was starting to fray, but he liked that. It felt earned. The days bled into nights of spray cans and petty scores. They tagged the water tower with a giant raven in dripping black, laughing as the paint ran like blood. Up there, with the paint running wild, I felt alive, like the town couldn't touch me anymore. They swiped cigarettes from a gas station, Tuck's knife flashing just enough to make the clerk back off. Marcus's hands stopped shaking after the first week. He learned to move fast, to keep his head down, to grin when Jace slung an arm around him and called him one of us. It was a rush, like jumping off a cliff and landing on your feet every time. Tonight, they were sprawled in the lot, the lantern casting long shadows across the busted couch. Lila sat cross-legged on a crate, sketching something in a notebook she never let anyone see. Her blue streak glowed in the dim light, and Marcus caught himself staring longer than he should have. She glanced up, catching him. "What?" she snapped, but her lips twitched into a half-smile. "Nothing," he mumbled, heat creeping up his neck. She snorted. "You're weird, newbie. Keep it that way." Jace paced nearby, restless, his boots kicking up dust. "We're ready for more," he said, voice slow and electric. "Something real." Tuck nodded, flipping his knife open and shut. Marcus leaned forward. "Like what?" Jace's eyes glinted. "You'll see. Gotta trust us first." He tossed Marcus a beer from a stolen six-pack, the can cold and slick. Marcus cracked it open, the fizz loud in the quiet. Trust. He wanted to, more than he'd admit. Lila set her notebook down, her smile fading. "Just don't get too cozy," she said, almost to herself. "This life, it's not all fun." "What's that mean?" She shrugged, picking at her nails. "Means I've seen kids like you burn out." Or worse. Before he could press her, Jace clapped his hands. "Enough gloom. Let's move." The job was a car. A beat-up sedan parked outside a dive bar on the edge of town. Jace handed Marcus a Slim Jim. A thin strip of metal Tuck had bent just right. "Slide it in, pop the lock. Easy," he said. Marcus's pulse thrummed as they crept through the shadows, the bar's neon buzzing overhead. Tuck kept watch, Lila beside him with her lighter flicking. Jace nudged Marcus. "Go." The window was tight, but the Slim Jim slipped in smooth. Marcus jiggled it, sweat beading on his forehead, until a soft click sounded. The door swung open, and the ravens whooped quietly. Jace rifled through the glove box, pulling out a wad of cash and a half-empty pack of smokes. "Jackpot," he grinned, tossing Marcus the cigarettes. The car smelled like leather and stale beer, and for a second, Marcus felt invincible. "Let's say it's a good time." The lock clicked, the cash spilled out, and for a second, I was untouchable. Until it all sank in. But the rush didn't follow him home. Dawn was breaking when he climbed through his window, the bandana damp with sweat. He'd barely hit the mattress when Ellie's voice cut through the haze. "Where do you keep going?" She stood in his doorway, her pajama sleeves too long, her brown eyes wide in pleading. Marcus groaned, rolling over. "Nowhere, Elle. Go back to bed." She stepped closer, voice trembling. "You're different. I don't like it. Please stop." He sat up, irritation flaring. "I'm fine. Just leave me alone." She hugged herself, tears brimming. "I'm telling Mum if you don't." He glared, the words sharp on his tongue. "Snitch then. See if I care." She flinched, then ran back to her room, the door clicking shut. Guilt gnawed at him, but he shoved it down. Ellie didn't get it. She couldn't. He skipped school again that day, meeting the ravens at a warehouse they claimed empty successfully. He skipped school again that day, meeting the ravens at a warehouse they'd claimed empty except for crates and graffiti. Jace was all energy, pacing like a caged wolf. "We've got a real score coming," he said, voice dropping low. "Pawn shop on 5th.
Cash, jewelry, the works. You in, Marcus? The air shifted, heavier now. Lila's warning echoed in his head, but the rush, the way Jace looked at him, like he mattered, drowned it out. Yeah, he said, grinning. I'm in. Jace slapped his back, hard enough to sting. That's my boy. Tomorrow night, we fly. Tuck smirked, and Lila just watched, her lighter still. Marcus's heart raced, not from fear this time, but from something bigger. He was a raven now. Whatever came next, he'd face it with them. You said, to the part. The night was too quiet, like the town itself was holding its breath. Marcus adjusted the bandana around his wrist, the frayed edges catching on his skin, as he followed the ravens down a shadowed alley. The pawn shop on Fifth loomed ahead, a squat brick box with a flickering sign that read Haven Pawn in chipped red letters. Jace led the way, a crowbar swinging loose in his hand, his grin sharp as a blade. This is it, he said, voice low and charged. We hit fast, we hit hard. Marcus, you're on cash. Marcus nodded, throat tight. The rush from last night still buzzed in his veins, but this felt different. Bigger, heavier. Tuck carried a duffel bag, empty for now, while Lila lingered at the alley's mouth, her lighter flicking like a nervous tick. 5 minutes, she muttered. In and out. Jace smirked. Relax, Lee. We're golden. The back door was flimsy, rusted at the hinges. Jace wedged the crowbar in and popped it open with a groan of metal. The sound echoed, too loud in the stillness, and Marcus flinched. Move, Jace hissed, shoving him inside. The air hit him first, stale, thick with dust and the faint tang of metal. Glass cases lined the walls, glinting with watches, rings, and chains. A counter in the back held a cash register, old and clunky, the target Jace had pinned on him. Tuck went for the cases, smashing glass with a muffled crunch, stuffing jewelry into the bag. Jace prowled the room, grabbing anything that shone. Marcus reached the register, hands slick with sweat. He yanked at the drawer, locked. Jace, he whispered. It's stuck. Jace tossed him the crowbar. Break it. The first swing was clumsy, the bar slipping off the edge. The second cracked the register open, coins spilling like shattered teeth. Marcus scooped bills into his pockets, heart hammering. This wasn't spray paint or cigarettes. This was real. Too real. A noise, shuffle, froze him mid-grab. He turned, and there, in the doorway to a back room, stood an old man. Mr. Hensley. Marcus knew him from church, white hair, hunched shoulders, always slipping Ellie candy after service. Now he stood there, bathrobe askew, eyes wide with terror. What are you doing? He stammered, voice frail. The glass shattered, the cash poured out, but then I saw him, Hensley, and everything froze. Marcus's stomach dropped. Get out, Jace barked. Lunging forward, crowbar raised. Hensley stumbled back, hands up, and Marcus moved without thinking, grabbing Jace's arm. Don't, Jace whirled on him, eyes blazing. You soft now. Before Marcus could answer, an alarm shrieked, sharp, piercing, slicing through the haze. Cops! Lila yelled from outside. Tuck bolted, bag swinging, and Jace cursed, shoving past Marcus. Move, idiot! They spilled into the alley, legs pumping, the wail of sirens growing closer. Marcus clutched the cash, legs burning as he followed. But the ravens split, Jace and Tuck one way, Lila another. He hesitated, then ducked behind a dumpster, alone. Unless he was great. The sirens faded, but his pulse didn't. He stayed there, crouched in the stink of garbage, until the night swallowed the chaos. The cash burned in his pockets, a crumpled wad of 20s and 10s. He stumbled home, the climb through his window slower this time, every move heavy. He shoved the money under his mattress, the bills crinkling like an accusation, and collapsed, chest tight.
Hensley's face wouldn't leave him, those scared, watery eyes.
He didn't hear the door until it slammed open. His father stood there, silhouette dark against the hall light, fists clenched. "You think I don't know?" he roared. Marcus scrambled up, head pounding. "Know what?" he shot back, voice raw. His father stepped closer, breath hot with anger. "You're sneaking out, coming back at all hours. What's this?" He yanked Marcus's arm, the bandana catching his eye. "Some gang trash. You're throwing your life away."
Marcus ripped his arm free, fury boiling over. "Maybe I don't want your life. You ever think of that? You and Mum praying me into a box I hate." His father's face twisted, hurt flashing beneath the rage. "You don't know what you're saying," he growled. "You're my son, not some street rat." Marcus laughed, bitter and jagged. "Then let me breathe." He shoved past, storming out the front door before his father could stop him. The air outside hit like a slap, cold and unforgiving. He wandered, feet carrying him back to the lot, the lantern still flickering. Lila was there, alone, sitting on the couch with her knees drawn up. She didn't look surprised to see him. "You okay?" she asked, voice soft for once. He nodded, then shook his head, sinking beside her. "Jace, he didn't care about that old man. I stopped him, and he, yet of stages." The lantern sputtered, casting her face in shadow. "What do I do?" he whispered. Lila didn't answer, just handed him the lighter. "Figure it out," she said, standing. Lila's words cut deeper than the night. She saw through me, through Jace, and I didn't know what to believe anymore. She walked off, leaving him with the flame and a choice he wasn't ready to make. The lot felt different now. Colder, emptier, like the shadows had teeth. Marcus sat on the busted couch, the lighter Lila gave him flicking in his hand, its tiny flame a weak shield against the dark. Sleep hadn't come after the pawn shop mess, just flashes of Hensley's terrified face and the crinkle of stolen cash under his mattress. Jace's silence gnawed at him worse than anything. No calls, no meetups, just Lila's words looping in his head. "He thinks you're weak." Footsteps crunched behind him. He tensed, flame dying as he pocketed the lighter. Jace emerged from the gloom, alone, his usual grin replaced by a hard, unreadable line. You're here, voice flat. "Didn't think you'd show after last night." Marcus stood, bandana itching against his wrist. "I'm still in," he said, forcing steel into the words. Jace stepped closer, eyes narrowing. "'Cause stopping me from handling that old man, that's not Raven material." Marcus's jaw tightened. He wasn't a threat. "You didn't need to." Jace cut him off, voice rising. "I decide what's needed. You don't. You want to be one of us? You prove it." He pulled a rusted pipe from his jacket, tossing it at Marcus's feet with a dull clang. "Rival kid's been sniffing around our turf. Skinny punk, red hoodie. Find him tonight. Mess him up. Or you're out." The pipe glinted in the lantern light, heavy with intent. Marcus stared at it, stomach churning. "Mess him up how?" Jace smirked, cold and sharp. "Figure it out," Tuckle pointed to him. "Don't come back till it's done." He turned, vanishing into the dark, leaving Marcus with the weight of the order and the echo of his boots. School was a ghost town by dusk, the parking lot empty except for Tuck's slouched figure near the bleachers. He jerked his head toward the tracks across the street. "Bore the burden. Red hoodies over there, tagging our spot. Go." Marcus gripped the pipe, its chill seeping into his palm as he crossed the road. The tracks stretched into the gloom, rusted rails cutting through weeds. Then he saw him, a kid, maybe 15, spray can rattling as he scrolled a crude skull over a Raven tag. To see how the same work. Marcus froze. The kid was skinny,
all elbows and knees. His hands fold. The kid was skinny, all elbows and knees. His hands unsteady. Not a threat, just a dumb kid with a can. The pipe felt like lead now. He stepped forward, gravel crunching, and the kid spun, eyes wide. "Who are you?" he squeaked, dropping the can. Marcus raised the pipe, heart slamming, but the kid's fear, raw, unguarded, hit him like a punch. He couldn't do it. He lowered the weapon, voice rough. "Get out of here, now." The pipe was heavy, but his eyes, scared, young, were heavier. "I couldn't be that guy. Not yet." The kid bolted, leaving the can rolling in the dirt. Marcus sank to his knees, pipe slipping from his hand. He'd failed Jace's test. The ravens were slipping away, and he wasn't sure he cared. He didn't hear Ellie until she was there, her small figure trembling at the edge of the tracks. "Marcus," her voice cracked, eyes glistening in the faint light. "I followed you. I saw." He shot up, panic spiking. "Ellie, go home!" She shook her head, tears spilling. "You're scaring me." "What's wrong with you?" She pointed at the pipe, the bandana. "Is this who you are now?" "Stop it," he snapped, but she kept going, voice rising. "I'm telling Mom and Dad. They need to know." She turned to run, and he grabbed her arm, softer than he meant. "Ellie, please, don't." She yanked free, sobbing, and disappeared into the night. He stood there, chest hollow, knowing the cage was closing in. It was waiting for it. Home was a storm when he got back. His father blocked the stairs, face thunderous. His father blocked the stairs, face thunderous, his mother clutching a rosary behind him. Ellie hovered by the kitchen, eyes red. "She told us," his father said, voice low and lethal. "Sneaking out, gangs. This ends now." He held up the bandana, ripped from Marcus's wrist when he'd stumbled in. "You're grounded for good. No more running, or you're out of this house." They stood there, my cage and my anchor, begging me to pick a side I didn't even understand. Marcus laughed, a jagged, desperate sound. "Out? You'd love that. Clean hands, no mess." His mother stepped forward, voice trembling. "We love you, Marcus. Stay, please." Her plea cut deeper than his father's rage, but he couldn't answer. He shoved past them, slamming his bedroom door, the cash under his mattress, a silent scream. His phone buzzed. Jace's name lit the screen. The message short. Jace's name lit the screen. "Rivals. You're in or you're dead weight. Last chance star." Marcus stared at it, the ultimatum from the ravens clashing with the one downstairs. Two families, two looses. He flicked the lighter on, the flame dancing in the dark, and wondered which one would choke him first. The industrial edge of Haven smelled like rust and regret. Marcus followed the ravens through a maze of warehouses, their silhouettes sharp against the sodium glow of streetlights. Jace led the pack, a baseball bat tapping his leg like a metronome of menace. Tuck carried his knife, blade glinting, while Lila hung back, her lighter flicking in rhythm with her steps. The ambush was set. Rival gang, some punks in red hoodies who'd been hitting Raven tags. Jace's text had been clear. Star sign in or dead weight. Marcus's palms sweated around the pipe he'd grabbed from his room, the cash still hidden under his mattress, a ghost in his mind. The cash still hidden. "You ready?" Jace asked, glancing back with eyes like steel traps. Marcus nodded, throat dry. He wasn't, but he couldn't say it. Not after last night. Ellie's tears, his parents' ultimatum, the lighter burning holes in his pocket. The ravens were all he had left, frayed bandana or not. They crouched behind a stack of crates, the rival crew visible across a littered lot. 5 of them, laughing over a fire barrel, red hoods up. The skinny kid from the tracks wasn't there, but Marcus still felt his shadow. Jace signaled, a sharp jerk of his head,
and they moved. The first strike was Tuck, a thrown brick that smashed a rival's shoulder, sparking chaos. Shouts erupted, and the ravens charged. Marcus swung the pipe, connecting with a tire iron one of the rivals raised. The clang vibrated up his arm, adrenaline flooding him. It was a blur of fists and curses. Jace cracking his bat against a kid's knee, Tuck slashing at a hoodie, Lila dodging a wild punch. Marcus ducked a swing, shoving his attacker into a crate, but then he saw her, Lila, cornered by a bigger guy, his fist slamming her ribs. She crumpled, gasping. Instinct took over. Marcus tackled the guy, pipe forgotten as he drove his shoulder into the rival's gut. They hit the ground hard, rolling in the dirt, fists flying. Blood stung Marcus's lip, but he pinned the guy long enough for Lila to stagger up, clutching her side. "Thanks," she wheezed, eyes fierce despite the pain. To rise for the trap. It was chaos. Fists, fire, and Jace's taunts. "Finish him." But all I could hear was my own heartbeat.
Jace's voice cut through. "Finish him." He stood over a downed rival, bat raised, glaring at Marcus. The kid beneath him groaned, face bloody, defenseless. Marcus froze, hands trembling. "Do it," Jace snarled. "Prove you're one of us." The pipe lay nearby, glinting like a dare. Marcus reached for it, but Hensley's scared eyes flashed in his head, then Ellie's tear-streaked face. He dropped his hand. "No." Jace's face twisted, rage, disgust. "You're done," he spat, swinging the bat down on the rival instead. The crack echoed, sickeningly final. Sirens wailed in the distance, red and blue lights pulsing closer. "Cops!" Tuck yelled, and the ravens bolted. Jace first, Tuck on his heels, leaving the rival crew scattered and moaning. Lila hesitated, meeting Marcus's eyes, then ran too. It was brutal.
Marcus didn't move. Pain bloomed in his side. A stray kick he hadn't felt. Pain bloomed in his side. A stray kick he hadn't felt till now. And he limped toward the shadows, alone. The sirens grew louder, but he ducked into an alley, collapsing against a wall. Blood dripped from his lip, his shirt torn, the bandana hanging loose. The ravens were gone. He'd lost them, maybe for good. Hours blurred. Dawn was grey when he reached home, the front door creaking as he slipped inside. Ellie was there, curled on the couch, awake. She gasped, rushing to him. "Marcus, you're hurt!" Her small hands tugged him to sit, grabbing a damp cloth from the kitchen. She dabbed his lip, tears brimming. "I thought you weren't coming back." Ellie's hands were small, but they held me together when I thought I'd break apart. He winced, not just from the sting. I didn't know if I would. She hugged him, fierce and sudden, and he didn't pull away. Footsteps thudded down the stairs. His parents, bleary-eyed but alert. His father's anger softened at the sight of him. His mother's rosary clinking as she knelt beside Ellie. "You're home," she whispered, voice breaking. His father crouched, voice gruff but steady. "We meant it, Marcus. Stay, and we'll figure this out. No more running, or you're on your own." It wasn't a threat this time, but a plea. Marcus looked at Ellie, her cloth stained with his blood. Then at his parents' warm faces. The raven's chaos clashed with this quiet, messy love. And for once, he didn't know which hurt more. It was a case of life. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out, screen cracked, but glowing. "Jace, you're done. Watch your back, Star." The words hit like a punch, final and cold. Ellie's hand tightened on his. The sirens were silent now, but the clash wasn't over. Not yet. Marcus woke to sunlight slicing through his blinds, a rare intrusion after weeks of night. His body ached, bruises from the ambush blooming purple across his ribs, his lip still swollen. But the pain felt distant,
dulled by the buzzing in his head. Jace's text glowed in his memory. Star, 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 star. You're done. Watch your back. It wasn't a threat so much as a promise, and it hung over him like smoke he couldn't shake. The cash under his mattress pressed against his mind, heavier than the bruises. You said that. Ellie was downstairs, pouring cereal, her quiet humming a lifeline in the silence. She glanced up, smiling faintly, despite the worry etched in her eyes. You look awful, she said, pushing a bowl toward him. He took it, the normalcy of it jarring after last night. Thanks, he muttered, spoon clinking against the bowl. His parents were out, church probably, praying for his soul again. The thought twisted something in him. Not anger this time, but a pang he couldn't name. He couldn't sit still. The cash gnawed at him, a tether to the ravens he needed gone. After Ellie left for a friend's, he pulled it out, crumpled bills, stained with guilt. Hensley's face flashed again, trembling in that bathrobe. Marcus grabbed an envelope from his desk, stuffed the money inside, and scrawled, "I'm sorry," on a scrap of paper. No name, no explanation, just enough. He slipped out, hoodie up, and headed for the pawn shop. To save the pocket. The streets felt too bright, too exposed. Every corner made him flinch, expecting Jace's shadow or Tuck's knife.
The shop's sign flickered as he approached. Closed on Sundays, but the mail slot glinted in the door. He shoved the envelope through, the rustle loud in the quiet, and stepped back, chest loosening for the first time in days. It wasn't absolution, but it was a start. He didn't see them until he turned. Jace, Tuck, and two others, blocking the alley he'd meant to take home. Jace's bat rested on his shoulder, casual but lethal. "Thought you'd rabbit," he said, voice smooth with menace. "But here you are, playing hero." Tuck smirked, knife flipping in his hand, while the others fanned out, cutting off escape. Marcus's pulse spiked, the pipe he'd carried last night, a useless memory, in his room. To see his pulse.
I'm out, Marcus said, forcing the words steady. You don't own me. Jace laughed, sharp and cold. You don't get to quit, kid. You're a loose end. He stepped closer, bat tapping his palm. Should have hit that punk when I told you. Marcus backed up, hitting the shop wall, nowhere to run. Jace raised the bat, and Marcus braced for the crack. Jace's voice was ice. You're a loose end. I thought it was over, until she stepped in. Stop, Lila's voice cut through, sharp as a blade. She shoved past Tuck, her blue streak wild, a duffel slung over her shoulder. Leave him, Jace. He's not worth it. Jace whirled, fury flashing. You don't call shots, Lee. She stood her ground, chin up. I'm done too. You're a bully, not a leader. Let him go, or I'm spilling everything, cops included. The air shifted, tense and brittle. Tuck hesitated, knife still, while the others glanced at Jace. His jaw worked, calculating. Then he spat on the ground. Fine, you're both dead to me. Run while you can. He turned, the crew following, their shadows stretching long and gone. Lila grabbed Marcus's arm, pulling him the other way. Move, she hissed. They ran, her grip tight, until the streets blurred into safety. She stopped at the edge of town, breathing hard. I'm leaving, she said, nodding at her bag. Bus out tonight. You should too. Marcus shook his head. I've got something here. She smirked, a flicker of her old edge. Good luck, newbie. She walked off, lighter flicking one last time before she vanished around the bend. Home was quiet when he returned, the envelope gone from his thoughts. He found his parents in the living room, his father reading, his mother knitting. Ali sat between them, glancing up as he entered. I told them, he said, voice raw. The gang, the stealing, all of it. His father set his book down, eyes steady but softer now. Everything? Marcus nodded, pulling the bandana from his wrist. I'm done with it. His mother stood, crossing to him, her hands trembling as she touched his face. Then stay, she whispered. We'll help you. His father rose too, gruff but firm. No more lies. You mess up again, we'll deal with it. Together. Ellie hugged him, small and fierce, and Marcus let her, the weight lifting just enough. That night, he stood in the backyard, the bandana in his hands. He flicked Lila's lighter, the flame catching the fabric fast. It burned bright, then crumbled to ash, the smoke curling into the dark. The flame ate it all, the ravens, the rush, and left me something new, something mine. The smoke curled into the dark. Next morning, he walked Ellie to school, her chatter filling the silence. The sun hit his face, warm and steady, and a small smile tugged at his lips. He'd chosen, and for once, it felt right.